Hey guys, how you going? This video is sort of a follow-up to a conversation that I had last week with the Distributist, which came about as a result of my last video talking about his debate with Godless Engineer. And I also had some interactions with him and some of his followers on Twitter. I think after this, I'm probably going to get off the subject for a while because it's probably not the most pressing thing. But still, it's an interesting subject nonetheless, and I really enjoyed my interaction with these guys. So I would love to speak to more reactionary types going forwards because I think that while I don't agree with these people on everything, I think they've got a really interesting perspective. And they are pointing out some things that most of us are kind of missing, even if I don't necessarily agree with what the solutions are that they're proposing. What I want to do is look at things from the opposite perspective and to sort of look and think, how could you actually attack atheism in a way that would avoid some of the traps that these guys fall into and the frustrations that many of these people have in this endeavor? And in terms of why I'm doing this, well, we'll get to that at the end of the video. There's method to the madness. What I think we need to start off with is the old chestnut being the atheism is just a lack of belief defense, which you've all heard a million times before. You can't get to a political position from atheism, you can't get to a philosophy from atheism, blah, 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 therefore you can't critique me. Well, the problem that religious people are going to have with this is that it happens to be true. Atheism is just a lack of belief. The Distributists labeled this tactical nihilism, and that isn't actually true. It's not, it's very pithy, but it's not quite correct in terms of what's going on. It's definitely a tactic that's being used. But just because atheism is a statement of a negative position, it's a statement of lack of belief, that doesn't mean that no belief is held by these people. And really, you need to critique people based on what they do believe as opposed to what they don't believe. So atheists will hold typically one of a small group of related sets of ideas, be that secular humanism, be that nihilism, communism, and so on. There are more, obviously. And generally speaking, most people would have a kind of informal ideology, which is really just the status quo, general societal ideology that anyone within society would have. And you can critique all of these things. You can anticipate what they're going to be, and you can pre-formulate arguments showing where these things go wrong. You just need the person to identify which one of these views that they hold. And it's quite legitimate to challenge people on what they do believe. If you're saying that you don't believe something, well, what do you believe? And the person should be able to defend the position. If they're a secular humanist and you point out all these problems with secular humanism, well then they need to be able to defend their position. And it's really impossible to pivot from that to atheism as a lack of belief. But quite aside from that, if we're just talking about the attacks on religion itself, well, you're probably dealing with someone who's an anti-theist. And anti-theism isn't like atheism in that it is actually an ideology, although it's only an ideology focusing on one thing. So what you can do with that is to challenge the anti-theist on what problems that they actually have with religion, and to effectively expect them to demonstrate that. But the trap that you're going to fall into there is semantics, and the fact that people tend to be very loose with using the words atheism and anti-theism, and have a tendency to use those things interchangeably. In fact, an atheist or an anti-theist will probably use these words interchangeably. When they say one, they mean the other. Usually when they say they're an atheist, they mean that they're an anti-theist. I can't imagine too many people who would go to the extent of self-identifying as an atheist if they aren't also an anti-theist. You don't necessarily have to clarify with them that they are an anti-theist. If they're attacking religion, then they probably are one, and they can correct you if you make a false assumption. You have to be very self-aware as to which words that you actually use when you make your criticism, because the moment that you use the wrong word and use the word atheism to describe a critique of anti-theism, well then the person can instantly pivot to the atheism is a lack of belief argument. But they can't do that if you're just simply attacking anti-theism, because anti-theism is a belief. It is a belief that religious institutions and religion as an ideology is harmful in some way, or at least is negative in some way, and can challenge that. But that isn't a true statement about atheism necessarily. So the quote-unquote tactical nihilism of the atheism as a lack of belief argument is actually, while it's a tactic, it's a valid tactic. And it's really you that needs to sharpen up your arguments as a believer. It's not on your opponent to sort of hand you the keys to victory and to sort of say, well, you should have known that I was talking about anti-theism. Because really, that's not really how a discussion works. Ideally, obviously, everyone, yes, has charity towards other people's positions. Now, that happens less often than we would like. But really, the person can't be expected to read your mind or automatically know what you're saying. So really, you can anticipate the arguments made by an anti-theist, because, look, it's not a unified ideology, so you will need to get them to clarify their positions, but you can anticipate common critiques of religion, and you can pre-formulate responses to those, and you can come into the discussion armed with some arguments. But look, if you're reading an article, a news article, and the only thing that you actually know about the person is that they self-identify as an atheist, then really you're kind of stuck, because you can't, in that case, assuming that they don't attack religion, you can't assume that they're an anti-theist. And if they haven't identified any other ideology they hold, then, well, you just have to assume that you don't know what the ideology is. There will be an ideology, you just don't know. So the only option really left to you in that circumstance is flipping the script, and instead of going negative, going positive, to actually sell the benefits of your worldview and your religion. So the problem that you're going to have with that is that you need to sell that ideology in a way that effectively cannot be extricated from the belief in a God or the belief in a deity. Because the moment that an advantage comes from your religion that's not provided by the deity, the person can instantly just say, well, a secular ideology could produce that. Now, whether that's being done at the moment, maybe it isn't. But that doesn't mean that it couldn't be done in future. But with that exception, you can't rely on arguments that presuppose the existence of God. Because you've got to realize that the person that you're in a conversation with doesn't accept that claim. So things like objective morality and the concept of a moral truth, you can't really rely on these claims, because an atheist that knows what he's talking about simply wouldn't accept them, and they won't be persuasive. It may not sound fair, but you're at a kind of natural disadvantage here, because arguments about secular governments or secular morality can effectively work whether or not God actually exists. But with religious arguments, if you're limiting it to only things that are delivered by belief in a deity, so therefore can't be delivered by secularism, and you're limiting it to arguments that don't rely on the existence of God, you're running into a very small pool of arguments that you can actually use that will actually work and actually be persuasive. It's really through finding the Goldilocks zone between those two things that you need to be. And I imagine from that perspective, that's a difficult argument to make. I'm glad I don't have to make it because I'm an atheist. So look, those are some thoughts on how I think you might argue with an atheist or critique an atheist in a way that has a chance of being persuasive and relies on arguments that are actually valid and made in good faith. But with all of that out of the way, why am I going through this? Why am I putting statements out there that might aid someone in arguing against my own position? If someone can provide a critique of my worldview in good faith that provides valid arguments, and I think about that and I go, I'm wrong. I got to change my mind about this. That's a win for me. That is me winning the argument. And if someone else has valid arguments given to them that they ignore or don't listen to, and they happen to be wrong, but they do not change their mind, well, that person has lost. Now, they may win the argument, quote unquote, but that achieves nothing. They are disadvantaged through not having listened to someone who should have convinced them that they were incorrect. It's beneficial to have your ideas challenged, because only through putting our ideas through the crucible can we ever improve them. And improving our ideas is what we should be trying to do as human beings. It doesn't help us to be, entrenched in our own positions and not listening to the other side. And if we can actually give the other side the tools to accurately critique our positions, then that can force us to think and to improve those positions. And if the opponent has improved arguments, then that improves our responses to those arguments and our counter-arguments. People have this idea that conflict in society is a bad thing. The problem with this idea is that it isn't correct. Yes, we do need social cohesion within society, but we also need to have our ideas challenged. We need to put ourselves out there, and we need to listen to people who have different viewpoints. A conflict of ideas will lead us to a better understanding. We need to find a way of increasing productive conflict while maintaining social cohesion. And there needs to be a balance found between those two things, and a move away from toxic conflict, from conflict that doesn't achieve anything except cause angst. And unfortunately, that's a lot of what our political landscape has turned into. But look, an improvement of our ideas doesn't necessarily mean progressivism. It simply means that the set of ideas of what we had is just a better version of what it was before. Now, that could lead us to progress in one direction or another, and that may not be what this group of currently calling themselves social progressives is advocating for. It might be something completely different. It may also be a move in certain aspects of our society away from what we consider modernity. I've listened to some reactionaries, and some of the points that they make are extremely valid in terms of the problems that have come with social progress. And these are things that most people just don't think about or don't talk about. But I don't think that the answer is to entirely reject progressivism. It might mean entirely rejecting the political movement currently calling themselves social progressives, but it doesn't mean that all progress is wrong or bad. It just simply means that we need to think more carefully about how we advance and in what direction that we advance. The issue with the kind of world that I think the Distributist wants to achieve is that it's kind of a gated community of like-minded people that reject modern ideas. And look, the issue with that is not the rejection of modern ideas. The issue of that is rejection of assessment of what the past was like and in what ways the present is better. I mean, we can take an honest look at the disadvantages that have been brought about by technology and by the change in our ideas over time, because there are negative aspects of these things. And the reality is that the ideal society might be neither where we were before nor where we're going now. It might be somewhere completely different. And the only way we're going to know that is by constantly asking ourselves, are we on the right path? And we'll only know that if we encourage other people to critique us and to encourage other people to give us a different worldview. Anyway, thanks very much for watching if you got this far. I'll talk to you later. Bye.